I'm Deirdre Harris Kelly, and we are in the studio of Hank Willis Thomas today. And Hank was one of the artists who participated in our exhibition last year, the program In Common with Romare Bearden. And Hank's work was featured along with several other contemporary artists and Bearden. And so we're here today to just get some thoughts from Hank and to talk a little bit about his work and Romare Bearden. Hi, Hank.
Hey, it's
Welcome.
great to be here.
Good. Hank,
Great to have you here, actually.
Yes, it's great to be here. And thank you for welcoming us into your studio again. It was such a delight last time we were here, and we walked in and we saw these big, beautiful works. And you lifted up the door and let the light in and gave us a different perspective on your work, which I want to talk more about. But right for the record, I just want to hear a few words about how you first came to art, where you were, what you thinking. Now, your mother is, the great Deborah Willis, and so we know that there's a history there. But when you first started to think about art as a career, as something you would spend most of your time doing, so who are you and how did you get there?
Thanks for asking. I am Hank Thomas, son of Hank and Deb, and I grew up surrounded by photographs, surrounded by the photographic archive. My mother worked at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the Smithsonian Institution National African American Museum Project, which is now the National Museum for African American History and Culture. And so I grew up looking at images by artists, by photographers, and also documents and reading and learning and listening to historians and others talk about the African American experience and to some degree the broader African experience. And I guess that was my primary language. That was my primary education, would have been in the visual culture and the history and legacy of especially chattel slavery in the United States and the many centuries of struggle and perseverance to overcome that. And I think my work is in that tradition.
At the opening, you said some very eloquent things about, being influenced by Romare Bearden. Can you tell us a little bit about, what that is for you, what you take from him?
Yeah, well, I don't think I'll be as eloquent now, but I do remember that Romare Bearden was the first artist that we interacted with in school. I think when I was in third grade, which would have been like 1985, so around the time that he was, or maybe it could have been 86, right?
Okay.
When did he pass
died
away?
in 1988.
Yeah. So, and it's like I was in third grade, and we were introduced to collage, and our teacher brought us books of Romare Bearden's work and had photocopies and challenged us to really think about our family, our community. I think actually it might have actually been the block.
The block. Mm-hmm.
And that's how we were taught about the neighborhood and so I think that was pretty cool, to be a New York City public school student learning about my own community and my way to talk about community through the work of Romare Bearden. And I think that echoed throughout my life, is that so many things that I was interested in, he was thinking about or he'd done, and was also curious about or challenging the world to learn or do more with it.
And just mentioning the block now that we hit on that, talk a little bit about that piece you did for the Studio Museum in Harlem during the centennial. 2011 would have been, yeah.
Yeah, the Studio Museum had an exhibition called The Block, and it was really inviting various artists to kind of meditate on Bearden's two epic or iconic works. And I spent part of my childhood in North Philadelphia, where my mother grew up, and so that block, when we were kids, we weren't allowed to go across the street. And so we interpreted that in the anywhere on that block, as long as we didn't cross the street, we were within within the rules. And so I wanted to go back to that block, and I photographed every house on the block, and then made a photo collage with various houses on the block and people there.
That must have been a lot of fun. It must have been like when we play with, color and forms and make little maquettes. And you are a multimedia artist. You do a lot of sculpture, photography, really innovative printmaking. So do you have any thoughts on like how you come up with the forms when you have an idea for something? And maybe if you have an example of one where the form actually led the idea.
Yeah, well, I had a professor whose name, his famous statement was, form is nothing more than an extension of content. And this idea that the content can take many forms was something that I was really drawn to. And I guess I have been interested in the form of collage and form of photography and the form of printmaking and video. But there was a work that I came across that was on the cover of a book by Alfred Barr, who was the first director of MoMA, and it said Cubism and Abstract Art. And there was I think, pretty beautiful torpedo, I think they call it torpedo graph, connecting all of these moments in art history that led to Cubism. And there was a brief reference to Negro sculpture. But I felt and continue to believe that actually that form needed to be reworked. And so I made another work using a similar pattern called Colonialism and Abstract Art. And it really tries to track the ways in which either consciously or unconsciously Europeans found themselves educated and enhanced through the colonial exploration and exploitation of Africa, where there was all of this brilliant art, all of these brilliant people, and all of this brilliant education, and that has really, I think, really shaped the 20th century and is likely still shaping the 21st.
Right. So the piece you did for the exhibition at the New School, we're going to stay with form and content, but the piece you did was a kind of homage to Bearden's Battle of Siconis from the Odyssey series. Beautiful work. Tell us how you got to that kind of homage to Bearden, and also that very innovative kind of printmaking that you were doing that's involved in making that work and many of these works.
Yeah. Well, ironically, yeah, that work was pretty revelational for me. So we were here in my studio, and my studio was actually occupied by another artist named Rashid Johnson before. And when he moved out, he left a few panels. And I'd never done anything that big on a singular panel. And I just left them against the wall, and it was during COVID, and I had been, I have a lot of like reference images everywhere, and I had, for some reason, the Battle of Siconis pinned to the wall, and I was just like, I wonder what that would look like bigger. And I have been making all of these screen prints of using this retro-reflective material that kind of reveals, like this image, which you probably can't see now, but under different lighting circumstances reveals an image to the naked eye that's different than what you see. An image under certain light is revealed that is not visible to the naked eye. And I had all these scraps that I never, they weren't good enough, I didn't like them, and I just was like, oh, what if I just tried to I just needed something to try to reference. And so I didn't make, and I just started cutting up the material and just sticking it to the panels, just really just because I was curious,
Yeah,
frankly, and
curious.
I would never have had the courage to make something that big if I hadn't had a reference. But I think I was interested in those work. And so that has been, for the past 2 years, I've been making collages of all forms, looking at like this work behind me as a Matisse reference, but also a Roy Lichtenstein and a Saul Bass reference. But then Aaron Douglas has been a major influence. And of course Bearden. And so I really was, I think, that was a chapter in my life, really just kind of realizing that I don't need to have everything so contained, that I can explore. And what I was so fascinated with his work is this storytelling, right? That he was telling an age-old story, but telling it through a lens that I felt could be, like, for instance, when I first saw it, I thought it was about Columbus and Saint-Domingue.
It could be.
Which it could be, because
yeah.
I was thinking about his collages of Toussaint Louverture, and so I didn't even really have the full context of the Odyssey in it, and I realized that a lot of the stories that Bearden was fascinated with are stories that are timeless,
Yes.
and that I was really wanting to I was trying to do the same thing, but using typically photographic references, but also that collage allows the story to be even actually more open-ended.
Now, the retroreflective, this is so interesting to me, this idea that what we see is not actually everything, and that it's almost impossible to see two things at once or keep it in your brain at the same time. And you've always, I think, from photography and the early days of working with logos and your Nike work, have a way of presenting things with a different perspective. Even your sculpture, where you're sort of taking out of context, taking objects and forms out of context.
You must be an art historian.
To show, no, I'm just an artist, that's all.
No, you know a lot about art.
But, and using that sort of as a way of showing a different perspective, forcing us into a different perspective, because that's what artists do, I think, but you do it really well. And that material, talk a little bit more about how you happened upon that. This is the material that's used to make signs, right?
Yeah.
Sign paintings.
And so I can't help it because there's a camera there. I got to try some. Don't stop.
Oh.
I always think about this because I'm always curious. Does this, let's see. Oh, yes.
Ooh.
So could you do that for a moment?
Oh, so then it will show that in his lens.
Yeah, the closer it is.
Right above the camera,
Yeah.
right? Right with, yeah.
Yeah. So if you turn the light off, you'll see that there's, can you turn the light off for a moment? So you see there's an image that's blue and black, and it's just forms. And if you turn the light on, I think you see all kinds of other images.
Yeah.
Is this true?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've never done this on camera before, so that's why.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that we're doing that. We're exploring that.
But so this is a material that is a wayfinding material. Like, we see it on the one-way signs and stop signs and highway signs. And during the daytime, they just look like regular signs. But at nighttime, they're only visible if you're in a car and the headlights are on. And it's only illuminating from your unique perspective.
Yes.
And I feel like that was I kind of stumbled upon it in a sign shop, and I realized that using a wayfinding material to talk about history was really a cool opportunity. And I wanted to really push myself and push the material to say new things. And so I really have kind of been meditating on it and working with it for almost 10 years now, but only when I had this epiphany with this panel and the Bearden work that I actually kind of find, I think, the ultimate
form.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Bearden coming up with using collage in the way that he did. I think was just he had been working with the figure earlier in the 40s, and then he went through his whole abstract period. And then I think he just came across a way of inserting figures or making the figures with abstract forms and colors and different papers that just was like, must have been like zing, like you get that moment where it's just the right thing. And so underneath, when we see the other perspective, what we're seeing are groups of people that look like in protest. They look like African Americans. Many of the civil rights pictures I might remember from the news. Is that intentional, and how is that used?
Well, I think protests as we know it and images of them are really a product of the 20th century. That nonviolent protest as a creative political act is something that is relatively new. And each one has informed the next. And that's much like art. Romare Bearden was often looking at art historical references from different communities, different cultures, different times, and building off of it. I'm doing that. But I'm also merging, I think, what I've learned from artists like him and from activists and movements that I think are still going on, but also have, I think, had great success in creating a better, brighter world for all of us.
They have changed a lot, though, even like the look of protest and how people come to the protest, how they're dressed to the protest. And because I think about the civil rights, everybody had on like work clothes and hats and gloves sometimes. And now it's just like, let's just get out in the street, and do the thing, right? And then also now with barriers, protests, you see these images from demonstrations and rallies, and you can see the divisions that they make to cordon off areas and to contain protests.
Yeah, it's really, for me, pretty fascinating to see how there almost has become a formula, and maybe that formula is not as effective as it was in other moments of time.
And that's why we need artists, because we need different ways to get these points across. So artists are activists, many of them. I wouldn't put that on all artists, but in what ways do you think activism, what role does it play in your work or others, if you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you call activism, right? I think I believe all artists are activists, but I don't believe all art is propaganda. I do believe all art is propaganda.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
and I think all art is as activism because the person making it has a very specific intent to have an impact on the heart and mind of someone else. And whether it be an abstract painting or a very, very esoteric conceptual work of art, it's a political act to say this is important, this deserves your time and attention, it deserves to be considered and maybe even preserved beyond my lifetime. And I think what I actually think that artists would serve society's best if they were seen as actually important civic operators. That the role of art in civic life isn't just to decorate; it is to dream, it's to imagine, it's to build in areas that are more complex for us to deal with, where most of life isn't 1 + 1 = 2. The equations are much more complex, and it requires creative thinking to actually face some of the challenges.
Especially now, it does. I think we have to turn to the arts in some way to get us to shake us out of the regular ways in which we think and see things, and to just extract things from our environment and shine a light on it, like, so to speak, to shine a light on it.
See what you did there?
Yeah. I didn't mean to, but that was pretty good.
It's good, yeah.
So I wanted to also ask you about upcoming projects, things that you're doing.
Yeah, so I think out of my kind of initial exploration or like enthusiasm of getting to kind of work with or reference or build off of the work of Romare Bearden, I started to do that more with Matisse and also another artist named Aaron Douglas. And so I had a show last year or two, I think last year, recently, called I've Known Rivers, which was inspired by the Langston Hughes poem.
Yeah.
But for that poem, when it was first published, it was an illustration by Aaron Douglas that was a depiction of Langston Hughes. And I love that collaboration. And so I started to think about that moment in time of the Harlem Renaissance and all of the brilliance that emerged there. And I started to see connection between Aaron Douglas and Matisse, and then Matisse and Romare Bearden, and also all of the social progress that came as a result of a lot of the things that they were doing. And so my show in London that opens soon at Pace Gallery is called Kinship of the Soul, and it's really mashing up, remixing. It's collages within collages, collages of moments in time from different movements from across the world, but also different artist practices blended with using this retroreflective material.
And I do still hear sort of that activism through that in a way, even just going back and looking at those artists and because I don't think a lot of people look at the Harlem Renaissance artists, the visual artists, in that way necessarily, and see what they were really pushing us to see things differently, to see Black people differently. I think it's something that Bearden used, just simply presenting as a way of subverting what were generally thought of as images of Black people and Black life. And so those are ways in which he was putting those ideas forth without even really trying, or without it being propaganda. But I guess it's propaganda in a way, is what you said, art is propaganda. With having gone through the election, the recent election, which was hard on all of us and very trying, there's so many deep divisions now, politically, racially, socially, and economically. There are real divisions between the wealthy and what's going on in this country. So your projects in the past, when you look at Question Bridge, when you look at the four freedoms, those are ways you were really agitating and using art very directly to engage and to change minds. So talk about those projects a little bit, or what you're doing now in light of this election. You have the screen prints that you're doing here.
Yeah, well, I like to say great art asks questions and great design answers them. And as an artist, I've always been interested in the suggestion that the quality of the questions dictates the quality of the answers, right? If we're not asking the right questions or good questions.
Okay, am I asking the right questions?
I think you are. Well, you're an artist and a historian. And I think that allows you, being informed and creative allows, I think, us to ask good questions, but we often wind up asking our questions in our little bubbles. And so with Four Freedoms, which was one of my collaborations going on, we just published a book of 600 billboards that we produced with artists all over the country. And they were putting questions out into the world by artists who are challenging our society, our neighbors, our friends to think about who they are, to think about who their neighbors are, who else we're in community with, and the world we want to be in. And then Question Bridge was another project where we were asking, in that case, African American men to ask questions of other African American men, and the result was that we're not a monolith. That we contain multitudes within any group, and so and there's as much diversity within any group as there is outside of it. And that's some of what we faced in this election, is seeing that Black men don't always agree. What you can't make a box of archetype and assume, as much as you maybe once did, that everyone is going to approach a challenge in the same way. And I think a lot of artists now, more and more, are recognizing that creating platforms for others to share their their wisdom, their knowledge is actually a really important way to operate, that it's not just us making something that we can show here or there, but to actually provide space and to open doors.
Right. And that's what Four Freedoms does, gives them a platform. Well, Question Bridge, I'm just going to go back to that because that was one of my favorite projects. I think, you know, the Nike project was pretty clever, but Question Bridge was just so deep and so different. Even as a woman, like just seeing it, you know, the multi-screen, the multi-channel screen, and then I believe it traveled around. What happened to all of that quantitative information? Did it end up in a book or
there is also a Question
site?
Bridge book, but there was a website, but it's not as technology has moved past it. We were actually ahead of our time, but like maintaining a website over 15 years, 15 years is pretty hard. But yeah, it was seen by millions of people. It went to 35, I think, different locations as an art exhibition. It's a few film festivals. It was pretty amazing.
And the form of it really gave you that sense that you're seeing individuals and the diversity of men and the responses and the way they looked, as well as, you know, their backgrounds or what they did. And I just thought that was a case where the form really followed and helped the function a lot.
Yeah, I know.
A lot.
And it's you know,
Yeah.
time for that again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Hank, is there anything you would want to talk about now? Your show, you said, opens soon. You're not saying what the date is. It's
Because we don't know when this is going to come out.
okay. Well,
I think it'll be out by the time but it's
Okay.
called Kinship of the Soul. It's November 2024.
okay. And this is Pace London.
At Pace London.
Okay.
And,
All
But
right.
I'm just really excited to be kind of in conversation or in kinship with artists like Romare Bearden.
Yeah, yeah. That was one of the things you said. You said that it was delightful to be, I don't know if delightful was your word, but you said how wonderful it was to actually be in an exhibition with Bearden. And you were in one in Venice. You were in that one that Bearden, that was the first time Bearden was in Venice. We believe. We hadn't done the research, but he wasn't included in any of the biennials yeah. So that was exciting, you know, to see.
Great.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I love talking with you.
Yeah,
And
more soon.
yeah, and we'll do it again soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.